I'm not going to talk to you about Westpac and a bank because I don't really want to get caught up in we're a bank and everybody loves us and we make lots of money. But what I wanted to do is take you through a bit of a journey I've been on around trying to understand how I can drive value and prosperity from what I do, and then how we are going on that journey at Westpac. Which is why this is called How I Found a Job That Never Really Existed. When my parents were telling me what to do, and that's partly because I left school 20 years ago. The economy has changed dramatically in that time. Hands up in the room, who remembers a service called CompuServe? Yeah, you see, less than 50% of you. That's back when the internet started. But I grew up in a world that was driven by services, and I love them. I'm not like Ted, I don't manufacture things. I love services. They do something to me that I find really interesting, the complexity of them, the scale of them, the bits and pieces that they're made of. They're just really interesting, and for me, there's kind of four areas that really drive that. One is that services are networked. They do that, they bring people together in ways and means that the internet has facilitated way beyond whatever we thought possible. Airbnb, what an incredible way of being able to book a hotel. They're scalable, they're incredible business models. They help us drive better and better value out of the things that we are trying to deliver and sell. They're sustainable. They reduce our consumption of things. Think of car sharing. I go into Sydney every day on a bus up Bondi Road, and I cannot get over the number of people in cars where there is only one person. Can we look at car sharing? Can we find a car that works for 10 people, not just one person? They're also sustainable because I work in a bank. We have a wealth business. You have super funds. We need to design services that are going to not be around in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, but are going to be around in 40 or 50 years' time, when you finally come to the point that you're going to need to access that money. And they're experiential, and that's quite an important fact for me because I come from a world of designing these things, so how do we really deliver value to people in those interactions that they have with services? Now, as I say, my job didn't exist when I left school. My parents thought I was going to go off and be a doctor. They were a little bit wrong about that. I actually went off and started doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things in market research and new product development in banks and all sorts of places, and really began to understand that the world I was working in was driven mostly by these things called services. Now, if you come from a developed economy, it's about 70–80% of gross domestic product is driven through service industries. Now, how, as a designer, can you really add value in that? Well, you should be able to, because at least 2/3 of the economy is driven by those industries. Can we find a place that we can take what we do as a living and deliver that into there and really change the way that people experience those things? So if I look at how do I define my value, I say really, I design services. I don't create websites. I don't do that sort of stuff. I look at these things and I really think, how can I bring all the disparate bits of that together? And people call me, or used to call me, a service design. People call me a lot ruder things these days. Thank you. But I did learn a couple of things. And as I was going on making these things, trying to get involved in really how do we deliver design into service industries, how can we find the spaces that we would play, a couple of big things come out. Services don't make it to market with a cast of hundreds being involved. Typically, we get involved really early. We come up with conceptual ideas about, ooh, the world would be amazing, but really what goes out the door gets delivered by people. There are hundreds of things. Compliance and regulation is just as onerous for us as it is for everybody else. But all of that is part and parcel of designing these things to market. The second thing is we just spend way too much time justifying the opportunity to do something and not enough time making shit. Now, as a designer, that's a real problem because we love making stuff. That's what we do. And if you can't do that, you begin to question the fact, why are you there? If every time you suggest an idea and you try and do something and it never happens, it just sits on the side and someone goes off and just changes the prices on mortgages because you can make a lot of money doing that, doesn't really help us. We're not adding value into that mix. I like to say this, it's, what is the total value service design has delivered to the world? Can anybody guess? I'd like to say not a lot, because most of what we do never, ever makes it out the door. Now, I say that, and that was maybe 5 years ago. Now, if I was to wind forward the clock and say today I'm stood on a stage in Sydney and I work inside a bank, I'd be saying that things had changed quite a lot. I began to realize that just looking at the experiential component of a service, just understanding how that worked, didn't really deliver change, didn't really do anything. I needed to go back to school and understand the very nature of how a service worked. I needed to understand how people did their jobs, call centers worked, how back-end systems worked, how technology architectures that cost tens of millions of dollars were going to facilitate us as designers being able to deliver a real change to the world. And so I moved away from design studios and thought, I've got to get native. I've got to get out there. I've got to understand how this worked. I actually went native to a really lovely place called Feltham in England, which, if you don't know, is where the Young Offenders Institute is based. And I worked for a business that was just over the wall. It was a lovely town. It had a real design vibe to it. And I had two and a half of probably the best years I have ever spent working. The challenge to us was to bring a level of creativity and change to that business, and we were given access to everything we needed to help us do that, the tools that enabled us to deliver that change. And so I moved. I moved away from being a service designer to what I call a designer of services, because I began to have an understanding that there had to be more than just the experiential component. The tools of my trade were changing. Now, fast forward to where we are today at Westpac, and really, how do we define the value? We are a team of designers that sit within a bank. That's a pretty strange concept, because we don't just design the digital components. We look at everything. We sit across the Westpac group, and we look at call center interaction, we look at product, we look at online components, we look at branch, we look at how we can support communities. But what we like to say is what we do is make cool shit. We are designers, that's what we like to do, and if you stop us doing that, we kind of really struggle. The other thing that I keep hearing, and over the last week we've just been delivering some very big projects, is everybody keeps going, it's awesome. Jeremy, God, that's awesome. This sounds amazing. Oh, it's really lovely. Can we do this? And we're like, yes, we can. But we've all got to be on the same train. And I think going back to the time that I spent years and years ago thinking, why can't I make a difference? Why am I really struggling? We're now facing into those same challenges in Westpac. Just because we're here doesn't mean that it's working. We still have problems. We still need to get general managers and members of the exec signed up to design really does change the way that we do things. That we do have a methodology that can help you generate value. Things that we've been asked to look at, giving access to affordable financial advice. Now that's a real problem here in Australia. Less than 10% of people genuinely have access to quality financial advice, yet every working individual has a superannuation fund. Now, who is telling you what the best way of investing that money is so that when you retire, you've got the best value? Finding ways to get old customers to use new technology. The world is changing. We can't keep passbooks forever. Checkbooks are becoming a thing of the past. How do we educate people in those new tools and get them comfortable with it? As a bank, we control about 25% of the market, which means we're almost a quasi-public service. We provide access to financial services, so we can't exclude people. We've got to find ways of enabling that to happen. Helping small and large companies get access to finance. A lot has been talked about in terms of providing funding to small businesses to grow here in Australia. It's seen as a risky market. It's not something big banks like to do. The government's looking into this in ways in which we can change the way we provide debt, talking about equity and debt as means to be able to do this, and opening up the market for more people to be able to enter and play into that. Improving home ownership. Anybody here tried to buy a house in the last 5 years? What a great experience that is. And then lastly, looking at some of the communities that we have. So we've recently had a member of the team seconded up to a group in Cairns to help look at Cape York and take some of our design perspective and capability up there as well. So what you can see is that as a bank, we're not looking at these as drive profit, get us our gross margin up in business lending. What we're doing is looking at these from a perspective of how do we take a design approach and really bring that to bear on some of the issues that we as a bank face, but also we as Australia face, because we don't exist in a world where we can ignore that. We are so big that the challenges the country face are also the challenges that we have to face. And that's led us to having to think about providing products like BT Super for Life, the first real low-cost superannuation fund that came into the market to give people the ability to save for their retirement. Really looking at, can we provide access to financial advice? Probably one of the simplest projects we've ever done, which was just helping people make a phone call. But what we ended up doing was taking 96 people a month who had access to being able to purchase much needed protection and life insurance to 1,600 people a month. And a lot of those are in communities where we don't have financial planners. People were literally turning up and we couldn't help them. All we needed to do was design a really good experience around a phone call. They don't sound like hard problems, but the difference that they make for our customers is substantial. Last year, we even won an award for this piece of work, which was Your World. And this is just a tool that was really there to help financial planners and customers have a much deeper conversation around what their needs were, to move us away from a world of flogging product, which is how banks typically look at the world, into how can we actually help you? How can we shift that conversation from being this kind of weird product manufacturer and seller to someone who genuinely is trying to help you achieve your goals? We do that and have begun to change the way in which we operate around this design philosophy to say that there are really three spheres that we have to address when we look at these problems. One is around desirability. Nothing sells unless customers want it. It doesn't matter what industry you're in anywhere in the world. If you're not solving a customer need, it is really hard to sell it. But also, how good is that experience? From our perspective, that's a big part of what we do. But we've also begun to understand that if we really are going to drive that change, if we're going to get this stuff out, we've got to find a way to make it deliverable. It's got to be feasible. What are the tools that we have in our kit that help us understand how to do that? We've recently buddied up with the Lean team. Sonia from the Lean team is here today to help us understand how we really can begin to design process and understand the ways in which that works and can help us deliver these things. The last thing is, it's got to be viable. We're not a not-for-profit business. We have shareholders. They have a massive requirement of us in terms of these short-term dividends that they drive, an incredibly short focus that the market has. But we have to drive that value. If it doesn't make money, the bank won't invest in it. We can't find ways to really change the way the customers experience that. We have a few tenets about what we do, and I think it helps us sit out from that kind of real commercial point of view, but developing empathy for customers is really where we feel that design has brought a different component to the business. It's really easy to put in a new technology stack. It's really easy to change someone's KPIs to sell more, but it's really hard to get people to understand customers, which is weird because we've got 8 million of them. A quote from one of the team this morning is he's coaching a bunch of people and they're questioning, do they have to speak to customers because they haven't got time? In our perspective, make time. The other thing is, it's also about the people who deliver services. Let's not forget that most services are delivered by people. It's not enough to just say what's going to work for a customer. You've got to understand what works for a member of staff. Any service environment where you're a frontline member of staff, why should the quality of your role be any less because you work within the business rather than as a customer of the business? How can we design that to be a really great experience so that we can give people a great job and hold them within the business? We collaborate creatively. We're designers, it's what we do. And we really do force people to do that. We bring them together, we find new ways of working. We're like rats in the ship at the moment. We kind of bury ourselves in corners, find anywhere where we can bring people together and just have those conversations, help them understand what the problem is and work through that. Design has an amazing way of helping visualize the world. And in that, it helps people experience what those solutions are. And the last thing really is kind of rapid iterative testing. Everybody talks about agile, everyone talks about lean startup, MVPs, all sorts of things are going on at the moment, but really at the heart of it, for us as a business, we want to fail when we've spent $50,000. We don't want to fail when we've spent $50 million. And interestingly, design helps us do that. It is an incredible way to de-risk a lot of the investment that we put into things. Are we really successful at doing that at the moment? Not really, but we're getting there. As a group, we're beginning to see how we can feather in that early testing of things, how we can create the world before the world exists so that we can go out and say, that is the direction that we need to go in. That is the technology solution that we need to provide. Now let's go and build with confidence because we know this thing works. All of that with customers, with staff. Test, 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 test. We've talked about that. Someone once told me this, which I still to this day think is probably the best way of saying it, which is rapido piccolo economico. This came from the Ivrea Institute in Italy, the Interaction Design Institute over there. And it just really means what is the quickest, smallest, cheapest way you can test something. We have resources at our disposal that are enormous, but really, can we get it down to a sketch and deliver these sorts of things? So the trick for us at Westpac, we are on that journey. We are bedding design in. We really are beginning to think how we can do this. And I would say to anybody who's trying to do this, the one thing that you have got to do is just not stop. The antibodies come out about us. They tell us to stop every other day because they think they know better. But luckily we have support, and luckily we're moving forward with it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy.